And thanks so much for tuning into the Daily Dose for Spiritual Growth. We are concluding the fruit of the Spirit, these godly characteristics today. Happy Saturday, everyone. I want you to think about a favorite sport you like to watch. It might be soccer. We just finished the FIFA World Cup here this past week. But I want you to think about, you know, the importance of boundary lines. Could you imagine? And maybe you have kids that are in soccer right now, or maybe you grew up playing soccer. Could you imagine putting 22 kids on a field without any boundaries? You would get chaos, absolute chaos, right? There is importance to boundaries. I want you to think about this. We've been talking about what is being produced out of our lives as we spend time with God, right? The fruit of the Spirit is the byproduct of our relationship with God. If we're growing in our relationship with God, if these godly characteristics are being displayed in our lives through our actions, through our words, through our attitudes, through our conduct of life, right? What we value, what we put our time and attention to. Now, a good indicator that the Holy Spirit's being produced in our lives is the ability to control ourselves. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about self control today. This is often a characteristic that can be easily identified to those who aren't being connected to the vine, right? Because they don't have a control of themselves, right? And, just like the importance of boundaries in sports that keep a game focused and intentional, there is importance to having boundaries in our lives and then having the self control, the controlling of ourselves, not to go outside of the boundaries. Why? Because we would get punished, right? There would be a foul. There would be, right? You get a penalty in sports and we would get a consequence. And also, and maybe not an earthly consequence, meaning that we'll get in trouble or grounded. You might get away with it. But what benefit are you gaining by doing that? It's that's what we have to understand. Oftentimes we think about, it's like, well, as long as I don't get caught, right? And it's like, at the end of the day, what we talked about the past couple of weeks is that, hey, God is a just God, and yes, he's kind, and yes, he's good, and all these godly characteristics. But really, at the end of the day, yes, he's gentle, but we have to understand that he's a just God, and we will reap what we sow, right? And so, when we're talking about living an abundance life, a life that is fruitful, let's continue. I know I'm a broken record here, especially the last couple of weeks here, talking about being connected to the vine. That is the only way that these godly characteristics will be produced out of us. Listen to Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28. Think about this with self control. A person without self control is like a city with broken down walls. Well, several times this past couple of weeks here, we've talked about even the importance of a fortified city, right? We talked about that with Isaiah prophesying this whole idea that you can have a peace, right? The shalom, the double portion of peace. We can only have that as we trust in Him. And when it comes to self control, if we lack self control, we are vulnerable. We're vulnerable to the attacks of the enemy. And if we don't have a control of ourselves, then he can just wreak havoc in our lives, in our thought life, in our words that come out of our mouth. We have to be careful. And so think about this when it comes to self control. Have you been towing the line? Have you been dancing the line, going back and forth with the boundary lines? Think about that, and think about like where you're at, and think about the why. Why are you doing that? Do you need to set some new boundary lines because you realize that your current ones aren't helping at all? Maybe you need to set some new boundary lines when it comes to your finances. Maybe you need to set some new boundary lines when it comes to your relationships. Maybe you need to set some boundary lines on what you participate in, what you watch, what you read, who you choose to hang out with. What, again, you, right? And the greatest thing is that God knows you. There's no hiding from him. And so, would you go to him today and say, Lord, would you just I want to gain a better like this characteristic of self-control. God, would you help me? And that's the greatest thing is we talked about that, in the very beginning last week on Monday and Tuesday is this whole idea that when we allow the Holy Spirit to guide our lives, we now will gain his desires rather than the desires of this world. So would you allow him to guide you? As we've been talking about, what's being produced out of our lives, would we first and foremost stay connected or go reconnect, and that's the great thing with the Lord is that you can be grafted in to his presence. Even if you found yourself separated from him, even if you found yourself in where it's like he didn't separate it, but you found yourself cutting him off, you can reconnect with him and you can be grafted in and you can allow your roots to be sustained and nutrients to be provided by him, the bread of life and the living water, rather than this world. Would you choose to do that today? And would you gain a fresh perspective of self control as you set some new boundaries and you allow the Holy Spirit to guide you? And I want to thank you so much for tuning in all week long. I am excited. I'm thrilled. I'm pumped to be preaching tomorrow morning. It is Father's Day. If you didn't know, if you didn't get anything for your dad, get something for your dad. I am so excited for what God has spoken to me about specifically for the church, and also how He has displayed, expressed His love, the Father's heart. I'm excited to be delivering to you what God has implanted to me. That's tomorrow morning, 10:15 a.m. I'm excited, and we'll be back on Monday for another daily dose